Right. Welcome all. Welcome back. We'll give you a chance to fill up your seats, grab you some snacks, get your notebook, pen and paper. So welcome back to what we like to call season 2 of Court, which is conversations on race and policing. Today we have a special series as well with the returning guests from last season that I'm sure you guys are gonna have a lot of questions for as well. So the Q&A button is there for you guys. As I introduce myself, I am Marlo Brooks. I am an English major studying English in the College of Arts and Letters here at CSUSB. I'm accompanied by my co-host, community leader and president of the West Side Action Group here in San Bernardino, Stan Futch. Stan, you can tell them hey.
How are you doing? Good to be here, and hope you enjoy this session.
So welcome back all, and if it's your first time, welcome, very welcome. You're in for a treat today. So again, like I always say, as our presenter presents today, if you have any questions or anything sparks you during the presentation, just hit that Q&A button. As all chats will be off for our guests, but Q&A will be open for you all. If you have any questions or comments that you would like to display in the Q&A section, you can post there. So thank you for that. So as we get started with today's show, we're going to begin with our land acknowledgement. So we recognize that California State University of San Bernardino sits on the territory and ancestral land of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that every member of the CSUSB community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1965. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold CSUSB more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. So we thank you. Now, without further ado, we're going to jump right into our guest today because he has a presentation that I can't wait to see as well. So, today we'll be jumping right into it with Michael. Today's series is called The Perils of Policing. And Michael, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much for that, Marlo. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here this afternoon. Thank you to Cal State San Bernardino, the organizers of Conversations on Race and Policing, and the Fowl Library for providing this platform for me to come and speak to you today. Once again, my name is Michael Sierra-Arévalo, and I'm joining you from Austin, Texas, where I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at UT. I'm excited to be here with you to present on my current book project, which is titled Peril on Patrol. And that's a book that's based on my ethnographic research on how danger and the possibility of death shape police culture and practice across 3 urban police departments in the United States. Now, I want to provide a little bit of context for the research. And I think it's useful to look back on some of the interests and the circumstances that preceded my entry into this work and which would shape how I would choose my approach and my questions when it came to asking about policing. So dredging back into what now feels like the very distant past, I arrived in New Haven in Connecticut in the summer of 2012 to start my Ph.D. And I was set on studying street gangs. And as chance would have it, unfortunately, New Haven, unlike most cities throughout the early 2000s, had experienced an uptick in homicide. In fact, its 2011 homicide count just missed the all-time highs from the late 80s and early 90s that mirrored violence patterns in many US cities at the peak of the so-called crack epidemic. So to address the violence, the city of New Haven started something called Project Longevity, a focused deterrent strategy that was modeled after the Boston ceasefire work of David Kennedy in the early 90s that combines not just police, but social services and community members to reduce gun violence driven by street groups. And I was fortunate to get pulled into this applied work very early in my academic career to help collect data on gun violence through what are known as group audits. It's sort of a roundtable focus group style meeting of police officers. It can include social service providers, street outreach workers to collect information on the perpetrators of shootings and shooting victims. They're often the same people in many cases, and the groups in which they are embedded. And we use that information to produce information like this network diagram here. So the lines here, the ties represent instances of intergroup violence, and the nodes are street groups that are weighted by their central neutrality, how important they are in the network. So instead of just reactively flooding a neighborhood with police officers after a shooting and engaging in those blanket stop and frisks that we know alienate and anger community residents, these data can be used to guide Longevity's efforts and other programs' efforts to prevent and interrupt cycles of reciprocal violence while also reducing the scope of punitive enforcement. Now, why do I tell you about longevity? Well, longevity was really important in forming my early interest in issues of urban inequality, gun violence, policy. But even then, policing, though it's clearly an important part of longevity, it was still kind of on the periphery for me. In fact, my plan at the time was to continue expanding my work on longevity, maybe do a case study of its implementation, try and understand the relationships between varying stakeholders like community members, police, social service providers, and the young men that were part of the intervention. And that was the plan. But then Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. And in the weeks that followed, as it became clearer and clearer to me that this was not a passing flash in the news cycle, I began to learn for the first time just how little we actually knew about police and policing in the United States. And I was shocked that we didn't even know how many people were shot by the police every year. And I was even more shocked to learn that we don't even have a reliable measure of how many police officers there are in the United States. To this very day, our most recent census of US police agencies and officers is from 2008, so over a decade old. So I learned these limitations of official police data as policing took an increasingly central place in our discussions, not just in the criminal justice system, but in areas of education, health, and the labor market. And it was then that I really began to see that to understand not only how policing's negative consequences affect the lives of the public, but we need to understand those negative consequences as something that affects the policing institution itself and how it's structured. That is how and why US policing continues to perpetuate inequities in punishment and beyond. So as a sort of complement to the wide and growing body of work that documents the lived experience and outcomes of those who disproportionately bear the brunt of state coercion, my research attends to the most visible and contacted agents of the criminal justice system, through whom state power is conducted and whose decisions have profound consequences for public well-being. Peril on Patrol thus flips the analytic lens to focus on police officers themselves, as well as the laws, policies, and organizational infrastructure and occupational culture that undergird the institution of policing. By focusing on the seemingly egalitarian, colorblind laws, policies, and processes that comprise the structural and cultural drivers of police behavior, this research enables us to understand inequalities in policing not as aberrations, but as the tragic, logical outcomes of policing's underlying structure. And though it would take some time for my own analytic focus to solidify on the role of danger and death in police work, the reality of violence on patrol would become clear just a few months after Ferguson spurred my decision to begin writing with police. And this is where Peril on Patrol begins. On the afternoon of December 20th, 2014, New York City's holiday season was in full swing. The famous Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center that year, a Norway spruce from Danville, Pennsylvania, rose 85 feet into the air and thick crowds perused the dazzling windows of Fifth Avenue. Across the East River in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, a smaller 25-foot Canadian spruce twinkled at the corner of Marcy Avenue and Fulton Street, a festive reminder of the holiday bazaar and the musical performances that accompanied the tree lighting ceremony just a few weeks past. Now, a little over a mile north of Marcy and Fulton, adjacent to the Tompkins houses, NYPD officers Wenjon Liu and Rafael Ramos sat in their police car on loan from the 84th Precinct in downtown Brooklyn. Now, in all likelihood, Liu, the son of Chinese immigrants who came to New York when he was 12, and Ramos, a lifelong Queens resident, were engaged in one of the infinite mundane tasks of patrol work. They may have been writing paperwork on their in-car computer or asking about one another's families. They may have just been taking shelter from the winter chill before getting back to the job of addressing the violence that had prompted their assignment to the Tompkins houses in the first place. But the violence that would strike at the corner of Myrtle and Tompkins Avenues on December 20th, 2014, would not be the kind that Liu and Ramos were there to address. Instead, at about 2:45 p.m., Ismael Brinsley, a 28-year-old Baltimore man angered by the police killings of Michael Brown and Eric Garner, followed through on Instagram threats in which he stated, "I'm putting wings on pigs today. They take one of ours, let's take two of theirs." After telling two bystanders to watch what I'm going to do, Brinsley walked up to the passenger side where Lou was seated and opened fire, shooting both officers in the head at point-blank range. After executing the officers, Brinsley fled into a nearby subway station, and as officers closed in on him, took his own life with the same weapon that he used to kill the two NYPD veterans. Later that night, from outside the Woodhull Medical Center where the officers' bodies were transported, Patrick Lynch, the president of the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, or the PBA, blamed Lou and Ramos's deaths on anti-police brutality activists who, quote, incited violence on the street under the guise of protest. Soon after, the PBA released a dire memo that recalled, quote, the 1970s when police officers were ambushed and executed on a regular basis, and proclaimed ominously, we have, for the first time in a number of years, become a wartime police department. We will act accordingly. 2 months later, in an echo of the commission spurred by the police brutality and urban riots of the 1960s and 1990s, President Barack Obama's 21st Century Task Force was convened to chart a way forward as a new crisis of police legitimacy took shape. On the 6th and final day of testimony, Yusri Yost Zakari, the director of public safety for Woodway, Texas, argued for renewed funding of the Bulletproof Vest Partnership Program that emphasized the increased danger facing contemporary police officers. He stated, being a law enforcement agent has always been a stressful and dangerous job, but currently, the law enforcement community is up against even greater pressures, challenges, and violence. Police officers face and witness profound danger on a daily basis. Later in the session, Chuck Canterbury, the national president of the Fraternal Order of Police, echoed this position, stating, now more than ever, we see our officers in the crosshairs of these criminals. Now, while it is true that armed street criminals, violent white supremacists, religious extremists, and active shooters pose very real threats to police and the public, claims of a policing profession that is now more dangerous than ever, or that officers are now the targets of a so-called war on cops, are supported by emotion, rhetoric, and political maneuvering, but not by empirical data. Instead, available data on felonious police deaths shows that the trend in such line of duty deaths have been decreasing for more than half a century. Compared to an annual average of 114 felonious police deaths throughout the 1970s, on average, fewer than half that number are killed each year since the start of the 21st century. Combined with nearly 30 years of decreasing crime rates in the United States, the narrative of an unprecedented danger and a war on cops is out of touch with the empirical reality of a policing profession that is safer than ever. Peril on Patrol attends to this seeming contradiction and explores how, despite marked declines in officer injury and mortality, police officers continue to understand and practice police work as a matter of life and death, engaging in what I term perilous policing, an approach to policing that is structured by danger and the preoccupation with violence and potential death. Now, to understand the origins and consequences of perilous policing, I chose to observe and speak with officers on patrol between 2014 and 2018 across 3 departments. On the East Coast is Elmont, or the EPD. On the West Coast is West River, or the WPD. And in the Southwest is Sunshine, or the SPD. These departments, spread across the US and embedded in distinct contexts, are all large urban departments that are tasked with responding to calls for service that range from low-level order maintenance to serious violence. By leveraging ethnographic observations and interviews across these disparate departments, Peril on Patrol is able to, despite differences across cities or departments, elucidate the deep, unquestioned assumptions of police work that drive behavior and resulting inequalities that are endemic to the social role and function of the police writ large. From within these 3 departments and from the front seat of the patrol car, I show how officers are socialized to engage in perilous policing that prioritizes officer safety above all else, perpetuating a collective understanding of their work that centers violence, danger, and death. Now, in the interest of time and to spend a little bit more time on the data, I'm not going to detail topics like how I gained access to my field sites or building rapport with officers, or how my own positionality as a Latino man affected the data collection and my experience in the police department, but I hope that we have a chance to talk about in the Q&A. Happy to answer any questions about those topics. So very briefly, the book is structured as follows. It begins with a historical look at the roots of perilous policing. This chapter argues that at its core, US policing has always been tethered to a preoccupation with threat to not only law and order or the existing social hierarchy, but to police officers themselves, be it from Black Panthers during the Civil Rights era, Native peoples or Mexicans along the Texas border, or workers in organized labor when urban departments first formed at the turn of the 20th century. Following this broad historical overview, Chapter 2 takes us to the present day and attends to socialization processes within the police department that inculcate officers with a shared understanding of their perilous work and a set of behavioral strategies for surviving it. This includes not only formal academy training on the rules and tools of police work, but informal socialization amongst officers and through officers' interactions with cultural artifacts that commemorate danger and death in ways that are difficult to see from anywhere but within the police department itself. Chapter 3 then turns to the observable behaviors, the practices of perilous policing that officers engage in to ensure that they go home alive. While some of these behaviors are relatively mundane, engaged in as a matter of course, as much as to stay safe, others directly endanger the safety and well-being of the public. All of these behaviors perpetuate perilous policing and its emphasis on danger and potential death, setting the stage for even the most low-level police interactions to escalate into open violence. Chapter 4 argues that this approach to policing, even if codified in seemingly raceless, neutral legalese about threat and officer safety, is a mechanism for biases concerning violence, criminality, and threat to shape broader inequalities in police behavior. Perilous policing, in turn, drives antagonistic interactions between police and the public that undermines police legitimacy, compromises public health, and even leads to the injury and death of police officers themselves. Finally, Chapter 5 provides a view into the ecosystem of laws, policies, and politics that allow for and even encourage the practice and perpetuation of perilous policing. This includes Supreme Court cases like Graham v. Connor that legally enshrine the concept of the reasonable officer, policies designed to control officer behaviors that are diluted by the unimpeachable imperative of officer safety, and the increasingly overt alignment of police with political interests that seek to expand police power in the name of public safety as much as patriotism. Today, however, I want to focus on data from chapters 2 and 3, and I want to show how officers first come to learn and understand their work as profoundly dangerous, then how their shared understanding manifests in their practice of perilous policing. So one brief note on how the data are presented today. If any of the text that you see is in italics, that's taken from some of my field notes, so what I actually wrote down in the field and then wrote up later. If it's in plain text, that was actually recorded in an interview that I had with an officer. So for those that are interested in the specific kinds of data being used. So to jump in, of all the lessons that are learned in formal training, none is more important than the need for officers to ensure that they return home alive. And nowhere is this lesson clearer than in the police academy. To ensure that officers understand this lesson, academy curricula emphasize the life or death stakes of police work and the consequences of not taking the steps necessary to stay safe. Following a 10-hour shift in late July, I met up with Officer Alonzo and Officer Dinkeller of the SPD for some Saturday night drinks. And I mentioned a video that I had seen in which a South Carolina state trooper shoots an unarmed Black motorist who leans into his car to retrieve his driver's license. So between sips of his beer, Officer Dinkeller, who was also an academy instructor, he suggested that this shooting was tied to academy training, which teaches trainees that everybody wants to murder you. Dinkeller described one such training scenario in which he played the driver of a stopped vehicle that contains a Sims gun in plain view. A Sims gun is a simulation pistol that shoots paint pellets, sometimes as rubber bullets or wax bullets. So Dinkeller explained, well, if the trainee doesn't see the gun, you kill the cop. If he doesn't see the gun, when he walks back to his car, you get out and you fucking murder him. But the problem is that you put them into that mindset. Alonzo, who was seated next to us, distilled that mindset concisely, saying, you're gonna die. Beyond flesh and blood training scenarios, online platforms like YouTube provide a bottomless pool of real-world examples of just how unpredictable and dangerous policing is. These videos focus on calls for service or car stops that have, quote, gone bad, amplifying the salience of these rare events for newly initiated police recruits. Officer Estasio in Elmont remembered having seen such videos and their effect on him. He recalled, we see a lot of videos of officers dying, officers calling out for help. Their mic is keyed in and we're hearing their last breaths, their last words. It hits home. Officer Michelson, also of the EPD, recalled being shown videos in the academy too. And he told me they show a bunch of videos of stops, dash cams, body cameras, to show you how things can go wrong really quickly. They show you videos to, I don't know, I guess to show you not to make any assumptions, to not let your guard down. And he specifically remembered one video that was actually shown across all 3 departments and remembered by officers in all 3 departments. This video shows the 1998 murder of Deputy Kyle Dinkeller in rural Georgia, an event that a recent law enforcement publication described as forever seared in the minds of police officers across the world. Nearly 20 years since Dinkeller's murder and years since he was himself a new recruit, Michelson recalled the video with notable detail. He said to me, so the guy, he gets out of the car and he's dancing in the middle of the street, telling the officers to shoot him. And then he gets up in the officer's face, screaming at him. If you get up in my face like that, being aggressive, I'm going to go hands on. But this officer, he didn't. And the suspect, he goes back to his car and he starts loading a rifle. The whole time the officer's screaming at him to stop, to get down, but the guy, he won't listen. And then he comes back with a rifle. The officer's still telling him to put it down. And the guy just starts firing. The officer tries to take cover, but the suspect, he keeps shooting. He eventually reloads. Then he comes back around the side of the car and he executes the officer. It was crazy. Such videos are dramatic proof of the violence that police must be ready for when on patrol, showing in grisly detail why officers must be constantly prepared and willing to confront an attack by a member of the public, as well as the deadly costs of complacency and an unwillingness to use force. Even after officers graduate the academy, they're required to attend periodic in-service training that formally reinforces the preoccupation with potential violence that's at the heart of perilous policing. So I observed officers in Sunshine, as you can see here, take part in this in-service training that was focused on firearms. So part of the in-service focused on video-based training, which is pictured here, that requires officers to practice making these split-second decisions about when and how to use force. These training systems allow instructors to alter various features of the video scenario while officers are in them. So it forces officers to make critical don't shoot choices based on the behavior of the characters on the screen. So in one scenario, Officer Stewart arrived on scene to a landlord-tenant dispute. That's actually the scene that's being projected on that screen there, between 2 men outside of a small house. He raised his voice over the argument concerning rent, and he told both men to calm down. He then instructed the tenants that were at the bottom of the steps to come with him and to step away from the porch. As Stewart continued to call to the tenant, the landlord then barks out, "Deal with this guy, because if you don't deal with him, I will." The landlord, he storms back into the house, and Stewart commanded him to come back out immediately. After a few moments, the man did reappear on the porch, only this time he was carrying a shotgun. Stewart immediately unholstered his pistol, he took aim at the landlord, and he yelled at him, "Drop the gun." Less than 2 seconds later, and without further command, Stewart fired several shots. So at this point, the image on the screen freezes, and there's 2 blue dots that pop up where Stewart's infrared pistol shots landed. Now, the scenario is over, and so I asked Stewart what he was thinking when he chose to shoot, and he said to me, he made a choice to go back in and back out with a gun. Him coming back out with a gun is already a threat. I gave him a verbal command to drop it. He didn't, and at that point, I would fear for my life. Sergeant Baker, who was the training officer controlling the scenario, viewed Stewart's decision as reasonable, drawing on the legal standard that's currently defining the constitutional use of police force. And he viewed it as reasonable even though Baker, who was controlling the scenario from behind the computer, even though he knew that he had selected a branch in which the landlord would not raise his weapon and shoot. Baker explained, "I don't have a problem with that one. The idea on this scenario is that the guy doesn't pick the gun up at you. But then again, who walks in when 2 cops are standing out there, grabs a shotgun, and walks back out again with a gun? When he pulls the shotgun up, how long does it take? Not even half a second to get that shotgun downrange. I won't critique that shot. That was reasonable." That Baker knew the suspect would not actually shoot is almost beside the point. What matters is that the suspect could have raised the firearm at Stewart, creating a situation which Baker thinks a reasonable officer would and should respond to with deadly force. These shoot-don't-shoot scenarios, along with videos of interactions gone bad, magnify the likelihood of exceedingly rare but dangerous events in officers' understanding of their work. Ultimately, this reinforces the necessity of perilous policing, and officers need to be ever ready to fight for their lives. Now, outside of formal training in the academy and in service training, the peril of police work is reflected and perpetuated by powerful symbols or cultural artifacts within the police department. that create a shared organizational memory of danger and death. In West River, a stark slab of marble stands in the lobby of police headquarters, the name and the end of watch date of every officer killed in the line of duty since the founding of the department etched on its black expanse. This wall serves as tangible evidence of policing's deadly stakes and confirms that danger is a historical constant in policing. Lieutenant McWilliams of the WPD explained that the wall is a way to pay homage to those that made that type of sacrifice. He continued, it's respecting so that they're not forgotten, and it's not just for the fellow officers or the people that knew them. He explained, there's a historical perspective. It's one of those things that we talk to our academy classes about. I tell them, as you're getting your head wrapped around doing this job, you need to realize that it's not going to be all sunshine and daisies. Take a look at that wall. Those were all good folks that started off sitting in a chair just like you did. Further, death unites departments and officers across time and space to a shared understanding of perilous policing that transcends any one department or its fallen. On the night of July 7th, 2017, I was entering a Sunshine substation for the graveyard shift when the first reports of a Black Lives Matter protest in Dallas came across my Twitter feed and that there were shots fired there. So over the next 10 hours, I was there alongside officers as we began to get information about what was happening in Dallas, and the death count continued to rise. And then on July 8th, Dallas awoke to this headline. Between this news release and when I went to sleep a few hours later that morning, the death count would rise to 5, marking the single deadliest day for law enforcement since 9/11. Now, after 2 weeks during which officers in Sunshine and across the country wore black mourning bands across their badges in honor of the fallen officers, I saw these funeral pamphlets in an SPD substation, a tangible commemoration of fallen officers saved by an officer who traveled all the way to Dallas to attend these officers' memorial services. That this tragedy occurred hundreds of miles away and claimed the lives of officers with no direct connection to the SPD or its officers is immaterial. The ambush of officers in Dallas, despite social and geographic distance, is commemorated through cultural artifacts that are clear evidence of the danger that all officers face, regardless of the city or the town that they patrol. What's more, these powerful symbols are not restricted to recent deaths. In another SPD facility on the wall opposite from where the images of fallen Sunshine officers hang, these two framed images commemorate the NYPD officers killed in the September 11 attacks. These commemorative artifacts tie the organizational memory of the SPD to a broader occupational level understanding of the danger inherent to police work, connecting officers not only across geographic space, but also time. As Lieutenant Pinelli explained, it's that public safety family, and we honor their sacrifice. When you become a member of the law enforcement community, you become the part of a larger family and you bleed blue. So when you lose somebody, whether or not they're in Dallas or Baton Rouge or New York, your heart breaks because they're a member of your family. They're a member of the law enforcement family. In turn, the shared understanding of police work as profoundly dangerous, constructed through both formal and informal socialization within the police department, shapes officers' perceptual and behavioral practices on patrol. For example, when officers graduate the academy and first hit the street, they're encouraged to engage in what I term tactical fantasies, which is sort of a hypothetical problem solving, where they consider a wide range of dangerous what-if scenarios. Lieutenant Pinelli posed such a hypothetical to me as we talked over lunch. So she says, okay, we're stopped at a red light. What happens if the driver of the car in front of you jumps out and points a gun and starts firing off rounds at you? What are you going to do? Are you going to throw it in reverse and just high speed back? Are you going to get on the radio and call for help? Are you going to pull your gun and shoot? Those would all potentially be appropriate responses, she said. But which one is the best for that particular scenario? It literally is really just to get you to think on your toes a little bit, because in this profession, she said, you do have to make those split-second decisions sometimes. Other officers described tactical fantasies that included any number of potential threats, from the potential of a random bystander across the street to pull out a concealed machine gun and fire on us, to the possibility that a gunman might begin opening fire in a mall while the officer was off duty getting a massage with a friend. Officers also encouraged me to practice and prepare for potential violence. Multiple officers took time at the beginning of a ride along to show me where they kept their medical kits or their heavy ballistic armor in case that they encountered rifle fire. And others showed me how to disengage the car lock, securing a long gun in their car. And so what this looks like here on this side. It's a lock that you press a button and it pops open so you can grab a shotgun or a rifle, or how to work the retention holster that secures their pistol in case they themselves were shot and couldn't draw their firearm to defend themselves. Besides these tactical fantasies, officers also engage in observable behaviors that are oriented by their preoccupation with violence. Some behaviors are very subtle. For example, officers will angle their hips to keep their gun further away from someone when they are interacting with them to prevent that person from disarming and shooting them. Or officers use a particular POI, or position of interrogation, in which they assume a bladed stance. So it's 1 foot slightly forward, 1 foot slightly back, with their hands up near their chest when speaking to someone, so usually around here. This stance, officers explained, allows them to more easily punch, block, or push if a fight should break out. And if they draw their weapon, it also allows them to quickly assume what is known as a Weaver shooting stance, which is preferred by some police because it minimizes the area of their body that is exposed to somebody that might be shooting at them. When performing a traffic stop, officers also make sure to touch the trunk of the stopped vehicle before approaching the driver's side window. After seeing Officer Menendez engage in this behavior, I asked him why, and he explained that this technique is designed to make sure that the trunk is closed, and that there is not a gunman waiting to ambush the approaching officer. And so I see him do this. He comes back to the car, he explains the logic, and so I asked him if he could think of a time that he remembered an officer actually being attacked by somebody who was hiding in a trunk. And he said that he couldn't recall an example of this happening. So I pushed a little more and I said, okay, can you admit that the probability of there being a gunman hiding in a trunk, waiting to ambush an officer is low? And he responded, yeah, it's low, but that's how we're trained. We train for the worst case scenario. We don't train to stop Granny. We train to expect someone to have a gun to try and hurt us. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. People do fight you. And although how an officer stands, or whether or not they touch the trunk of a vehicle, are relatively low stakes behaviors, others constitute uses of force that infringe on liberty and threaten the well-being of the public. So in Elmont, I was with an officer and we were driving around and he needed to provide backup to another officer who had stopped a red Jeep Liberty for not using a turn signal and for having a busted taillight. We arrive on scene and I get out of the car and I see that there are already several officers there. I got closer to the stopped vehicle and I saw that a heavy-set black man was in the back of a cruiser. I asked and I was told by an officer that he was found during the vehicle search, because he was a federal parolee, to have a bulge near his groin, and that there were 2 bags of marijuana on the ground near his feet, on the floorboards between his feet. So he was going to be transported to lockup for a more thorough search subsequent to his arrest for drug possession. Now, near the stopped vehicle, there were 2 more individuals, a young black man who looked to be in his earlier mid-20s and a young black woman of a similar age. Now, both were handcuffed, sitting on the curb, much like these young men that were handcuffed during a search of their vehicle in West River. I asked Officer Glenn, the officer who initiated the car stop, and who was searching the vehicle when I first arrived, why they were handcuffed. And he explained, well, when I pulled the car over, it was just me. It's for my safety. There was nobody else there. There were drugs in the car. The guy's a parolee. It's for safety. I didn't have any backup. So I looked around and there was a half dozen officers on scene. And so I asked him, but there are 5 or 6 cops here. Could you not uncuff them now? At this point, you have control. So why not uncuff them? Glenn's rationale, though still focused on safety, suddenly shifted, now focusing on safety during the subsequent search of the vehicle instead of the initial stop when he did not have any backup. And he explained, well, when we were performing the search of the vehicle, it's just safer. I don't have to worry about somebody swinging on me while my head is in the car. It's just something I don't have to worry about if they're cuffed. If they're cuffed, I don't have to worry about them, and I know that they're secure and there's officers watching them. A short while later, after the vehicle was searched and nothing more was found, the couple was uncuffed and released. Now, this encounter did not result in arrest or more severe levels of force, but it does highlight the salience of officer safety and the preoccupation with violence that informs behaviors that we know anger communities and which are far more common than shootings or high-profile cases of police brutality. Perilous policing and the need to ensure officer safety at all times motivate the behavior of officers like Glenn, who can draw on the unquestioned logic of perilous policing to justify the detention and handcuffing of 2 citizens guilty of, at worst, traffic violations and the possession of marijuana. In other moments, the practice of perilous policing pushes interactions to a point that is poised to erupt into violence at the slightest provocation, creating circumstances that are primed to escalate into tragedy. During a slow shift, Officer Erickson was doing laps in the district when he drove past a small group of Latino boys walking on the sidewalk. He stared into his side view mirror, muttering, "Look at these little shitheads." And I asked him if he knew who they were, and he responded, "No, I don't, but I should." And with that, he put his car in reverse and he backed up all the way down the one-way street, and he never took his eyes off the young boys and his car's mirrors. So before stopping by the group of boys and rolling down his window, he unholstered his pistol and he placed it in his lap with his right hand wrapped around the pistol grip and his index finger lying alongside the frame, parallel to the barrel that was pointed at the door, and beyond that, the group of young boys. He asked the boys, none of whom looked to be older than maybe sophomores in high school, said, "You staying out of trouble? You doing good in school?" One kid called out, "Yeah, I'm getting straight A's," which got some laughs from his friends. Another one added, "But definitely got some D's though, for real." And with that, Erickson concluded the interaction, telling the boys, "All right, you guys stay out of trouble. Have a good night." As he drove away, he reholstered his pistol and he told me, "I always do that when I'm talking to somebody out the window like that. You never know. They would have been able to shoot at us in a split second if they wanted to. That's why I keep it down here, relaxed, finger off the trigger. But you have to be ready for that. Always have a plan of attack." Erickson did not fire his weapon. No children were shot. This brief interaction did not end in tragedy. Nonetheless, Erickson's preoccupation with potential violence, even from a group of young boys who he did not know and did not suspect of committing any crime, created an encounter poised at the point of no return. A single furtive movement, a shadow, a mistake, an ignored or unheard command away from catastrophe. These behaviors, both subtle and shocking, are part and parcel of perilous policing. Across Elmont, West River, and Sunshine, officers socialize to engage with the public as if every call, every conversation might suddenly erupt into violence, demanding that they approach every interaction as a potential fight for their life, always ready to survive the worst. And because policing is distributed unequally across the population, the dire outcomes of this police activity are disproportionately borne by our most vulnerable. These existing inequalities and pervasive assumptions about race, place, crime, and violence continue to funnel police into marginalized communities, reproducing the iconic ghetto described by scholars like Elijah Anderson and the implicit biases that research shows are linked to perceptions of racial and ethnic minorities as suspicious, threatening, criminal, and violent. As it stands, the current arrangement of perilous policing virtually ensures that the young minority men most likely to be perceived as dangerous will be contacted by officers who are preoccupied with the possibility of violence. By the same token, perilous policing all but guarantees that police-public interactions will continue to unfold amidst conditions of suspicion and sometimes naked antipathy, fueling a cycle of mutual distrust that not only further damages the legitimacy of police necessary for cooperation, but which actively produces tense, antagonistic interactions that are more likely to escalate into violence that harms the public and police. I argue that enduring inequalities in who is stopped, searched, arrested, and shot by police cannot be explained by bad or biased apples. Instead, the broader constellation of laws, policies, and culture that structure perilous policing, even if codified and perpetuated through the colorblind language of law and tactics and officer safety, ensure that police behavior guided by a preoccupation with danger and death disproportionately concentrates in poor minority communities that are left over-policed and underprotected. Further, by shaping patterns in how police and their coercive power are distributed, perilous policing is implicated in the reproduction of other social inequalities linked to criminal justice involvement, including diminished educational attainment, damaged physical and mental health, labor market discrimination, and avoidance of key social institutions like hospitals, schools, and banks. These broader inequalities and disparities in police coercion are intertwined through perilous policing that all too often emphasizes the safety of officers above that of the public that they are sworn to protect and serve. Peril on Patrol contends that not only stops and searches, but the tragic shootings of Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Philando Castile, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and far too many more are best understood not as idiosyncratic errors, but as tragically predictable outcomes of perilous policing. To borrow from Ta-Nehisi Coates, these strategies and thousands of daily infringements on liberty are not evidence of our system malfunctioning. It is our system working as intended. So with that, thank you for your time, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Michael. A lot came out of that presentation. The data alone was commendable, and we thank you for even jointing on that path to even get some understanding of police departments across this nation. I did find it odd that we don't know the data when it comes to the amount of police killings per year, or from which department. I don't know if the race and equity is even released to the public throughout departments in law enforcement for each individual department, and especially for cities and communities that host more than one police department. This is a lot of data that we should have by the year 2021. That's unbelievable that we do not have this source, and it's not public information, public knowledge as well.
So yeah, we have estimates now, and it's because basically people got tired of waiting for the police to provide it. There's been talks for half a century of creating a federal database of police shootings, and it just wasn't coming. So groups of journalists have gotten together, community members, crowdsourcing has been done. So there's now a couple of different databases. Washington Post to the Counted, the Mapping Police Violence Project, the Fatal Encounters Project, the Gun Violence Archive. These are all now estimates, but there is no federal requirement to report police shootings. Some states do a better job than others. California and Texas have some of the better data, Colorado as well, but a lot of other states are in the Stone Age. It's a department by department issue. And so to this day, we basically can't depend on police departments to be transparent across the board. And there's something like 18,000 police departments. That's a lot of individual FOIAs to get information on something as important as when the state takes the life of a citizen.
With the heat that the police departments are under across the nation, it doesn't matter which one, you would think they would want to improve that transparency between law enforcement and community, to improve the status of officers and young people that hopefully want to grow up and become an officer as well. But a lot of this seems so in-house and under wraps that it's intentional.
I think that there's a tremendous amount of what I would call cultural inertia. Policing has spent a lot of time and resources, to be very clear, money through things like unions and through lobbying to police itself. They have invested a lot in staying separate from other centers of power so that they can continue to be the beginning and the end of what constitutes being a police officer and deciding on the standards. And so in some cases it's inertia, and it's active. In other cases, it's very much a story that's, I think, common to lots of organizations, which is change is very difficult to institute. And as I mentioned before, there's 18,000 departments. They kind of operate as their own little fiefdoms in many regards. If we're going to get change, it's very likely going to have to be at the local and state level. The federal government has limited ability to just say departments are going to do this. They can manipulate funding to some regard, like you will report this, or we're going to cut funding, federal funding. But we do have a separation of state and federal, and so the DOJ can't really just say all departments will now do this, which is a big part of the problem. But just within policing itself, this culture of it's the police department and everybody else. It's us and it's them. And being skeptical of journalists and not trusting researchers and not trusting the public, that's a tale as old as policing itself.
Mary, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to thank you, Michael. That was an excellent presentation. I was just wondering, the ride-alongs that you went on, do you think that police behavior was changed because you were a guest in their patrol car?
There's no doubt in my mind that there were changes to officers' behavior because I was there. I was an observer. At the same time, that is one of the necessities of doing an ethnography generally, is that you can't just go once. You have to go a lot. And so one thing I will say is that even the most standoffish officer who I began speaking with, it would start out with one-word answers, boilerplate about community policing or things like that you would see in a recruitment brochure, you can stonewall for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, but I'm in the car for 10, 12 hours at a time. Eventually, we begin talking about real things. We begin talking as you might with somebody else. Now, would there have been, really egregious malfeasance had I not been there? I simply cannot know that counterfactual. But I think it is telling that even though I was there, I was still told the things I was told. I still saw the things I saw. So if that's best behavior with somebody observing, you can imagine that if anything, it's an underestimation of the kind of phenomena that I'm talking about in this work.
So Michael, did you see a lot of community policing or any community policing where the officer did know somebody and pulled over just to say hi, or a group of young people that he educated in some form or another?
It's a great question. So I will step back and say that it kind of depends on what you mean by community policing, because we've had it for like 50, 60 years now, and no one defines it the same way. This idea of actually interacting with somebody in a non-enforcement context, I definitely saw happen. It was not the norm. And this, I think, it actually has a lot less to do with officers just not wanting to do it at all, but with the demands of policing. And so policing is designed now to be predominantly reactive. Departments have tried to rationalize how they distribute police resources. So it's all about response time. It's all about getting there quickly, getting through your call load, documenting everything. And so in some cases, officers' critiques of demands for community policing are well-founded. That, look, there's finite time. I actually can't take an hour to go and talk with neighborhood kids and pass out ice cream and meet business owners. I have to write paper. I have to get reports done, and we got too many calls holding. All of that said, I did see it happen sometimes to great effect. In Elmont, one officer that I was with, he was a veteran, a Black male officer who'd been working this part of Elmont for many years. And at one point, there had been reports of shots fired in an area, and he said, I know the house they're talking about. He knocked on the back door and went upstairs, and then knocked on the door, and it was a grandmother, and he sat down with her, and he said, listen, I'm not here to arrest anybody, but you and I both know that your grandson is involved with things. We know this to be true. I'm just here to let you know that you should tell him that he needs to cut this out. I'm not here to arrest anybody, but you should know. And so this was an interaction that definitely had the backing of the state. It was very much an or else kind of meeting, but it was not a kick in the door and arrest people. It was the sort of informal interaction that is never going to get recorded on the computer. But that requires that officer knew the grandmother, that he was familiar with the community, and that they trusted him enough to even let him in the door and sit down and have that kind of conversation. So those things do happen, but they are certainly they're not the modal interaction. It's far more common to simply take your calls or to engage in proactive fishing expeditions, stopping cars for insurance violations or traffic stops or busted taillights to try and see if you can engage in a further search. Those are more common for sure.
Michael, you mentioned the Dallas officers massacre, and it brought me back to myself. It's not a time where I would hear that an officer has been killed in the line of duty, and I don't feel for that officer and that department as well. That's truly a hit to the community if an officer goes down as well. It's just in the instance of when officers are biased towards the communities that they serve in. There's mixed feelings in there as well, so no officer deserves to be ambushed like that, or you took one of us, so we're going to take two of you. Those kind of mentalities. I just feel for officers in the work that they do. It is a very dangerous job, and at once upon a time it was the most dangerous job, but now we have this shift in law enforcement and community, and I don't know where we stand. I know law enforcement is needed I know that. I don't think bankrupting departments would do justice to this nation at all, but I do think, like you mentioned earlier, if data isn't presented, then we should start cutting funding until you can present to the proper data that this community deserves and this nation deserves as well, in order to get the type of funding that you need. for your departments to flourish. I want to lead in Robbie. Robbie had a question for your presentation as well. One of our series organizers, Robbie.
Yeah, Michael, thank you. Thank you. Excellent presentation. You mentioned, I think you referenced your positionality. I was wondering, how are you perceived and treated during these ride-alongs that you conducted?
It's a great question. And so as, you know, as an ethnographer, unlike someone that say, you know, sends a survey out into the world or collects secondary data from somebody else who collected and wants to analyze it, you know, we're very much putting our bodies in the field. So who we are, literally what we look like, that is going to affect the world around us and how people interact with us. So in the context of policing, there were a couple of key moments that I think really made very clear that I was a large brown guy in a police department, not wearing a police uniform. And so there's other things wrapped in with this as well. So my age, I began doing the work when I was 24. So I was actually around the same age as a lot of the younger officers. And so I would very commonly be asked, are you trying to become a police officer? Are you interested in becoming a police officer? And so in some ways, my masculinity or my masculine presentation aligned with the police department, right? I've got colleagues who are women who've also done ethnographies with police. They are never asked if they want to become a police officer. They might be mistaken for the wife of a police officer or a dispatcher, which is disproportionately female. So in that regard, my gender, my presentation influenced that. I think in some cases, my race, my ethnicity was also part of the story. So in Sunshine, one that stood out to me was I was led back. Usually I get led in by a sergeant or a lieutenant into the back of the police department where civilians, as they refer to them, can't go. And I'm introduced to a sergeant, and they're told by the lieutenant, "This is your ride along today." He's the researcher, and he looks kind of confused, like, "Oh, okay, well, let me go get changed, and I'll be in the lineup room in a second." So I go back to wait. He comes out later dressed in his blues, his uniform, and his first comment is, "Yeah, you don't look what I expected you to look like." The researcher from Yale. And so I have a very loud face. And so I asked him, you know, like, what did you expect me to look like? And there was an odd silence in the room. And then I was like, you look like you work out. And that was kind of the end of it. Underneath the surface, I think, is that when someone says that there's a researcher coming from Yale, which is where I was at graduate school at the time, they're expecting somebody in a sweater, glasses, a white kid. And I didn't fit that. And so in some cases, there was the clear breaking of that expectation. And in other ways, my own positionality, I'm the son of immigrants. A lot of officers in the departments I was in actually are Latino themselves. Their own parents are working class. My mother is an Army veteran. I went to state schools. I didn't go to private schools until I went to graduate school. And so those were other things that I was able to pull in to sort of begin to build rapport with officers. Generally, they were distrustful at first. There's a lot of questioning of why an outsider would want to be in a police department. There were assumptions made about my stance as a researcher that I was going to be overly critical. Some people thought that I was a journalist. Others joked that I was a Fed or that I was with internal affairs. I was just there to lock officers up or to get them in trouble. And so those things were kind of always, if not explicitly stated, always in the background. And so my job was I never lied to officers, but there was a sense of I needed to, you know, in some ways just tell them, I need your help. I need to understand. Even if I had my own theoretical motivations or if I had my own assumptions, my job was to listen and not to try and, in some ways I had to keep quiet sometimes. My job is not to convince them that their view of the world is wrong. It's simply to capture it. And so that's a long way of saying there were moments where it was especially clear, but it was always in the background.
Thank you, Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have another question? Oh, Robbie,
I have one. May
Okay,
I?
Mary.
May I?
Yeah.
Hi, Michael, Mary again. This has more to do with your personal interaction with the officers, just like the last question. I'm wondering, did any of the officers that you work with live in the area that they worked or that you rode with? Did they live in the area? And number two, how did they feel about the communities they were patrolling?
Great question.
What was their attitude toward the communities they were patrolling? And that's
Sure.
my last question, Marlo, I promise.
Our very own Mary Texera.
They're great questions, both of them. So the short answer is that very few officers live in the city where they patrol. This is partially a function of the fact that they're urban departments. And so these places are more expensive to live than you would see in a suburban police department or perhaps a rural police department. And they would mention that specifically, like the schools are not great, which is true in many cases. The public schools are not particularly well funded in the place where officers themselves could afford to live. The property taxes are high. And so by just living a little bit further away, they would just have more disposable income. So there were just some clear economic drivers to why they didn't want to live in the city. Others were very much tied to perilous policing. So they would tell me things like, you know what, I don't want to go to the grocery store and run into somebody that I've arrested. I don't want somebody following me home from the grocery store and attacking my family or attacking me. Nobody could ever give me an example of that actually happening, but that was a fear that very much aligned with this frame of the world as being incredibly dangerous for police officers that extended beyond the bounds of them actually being in uniform. Their job is so dangerous that they actually can't even live where they work because the danger could follow them home. So that was actually undergirding some of that rationale. As far as like what were their attitudes towards the community, it's difficult to give a sweeping generalization. Officers are not hegemonic. There are some clear patterns. I think one of them is that this was particularly salient in West River, which was the most violent of the three cities in terms of its official violence statistics. And there was a sense that the officers felt like the place was out of control, that they were sort of the last line of defense. They felt that they were unappreciated. That was very consistent across all three cities. We're unappreciated, we're misunderstood, we're getting called out to these places. I didn't decide to come here. You called us and I'm here to do my job. Why are you treating me this way? So this is around the same time that Black Lives Matter really explodes under the scene after Mike Brown. And so that is all in the air. In West River, there was a banner that got flown out, which said from Baltimore to West River, kill killer cops before they kill you. And so officers see these things and they feel like the community is aligned against them. And they see the news too, right? They see the coverage of only police shootings. They are a statistically rare event, but if you watch the news, they're covered. It's about 1,000 a year, which is more than any other developed nation, to be very clear. It's a lot, but they are rare in the full scope of policing. But police feel like the media is harping on this. It's only looking at the bad. And the community has protests all the time about police. They get called baby killers. They get said, who have you shot today? And so in many ways, they feel like the communities that they're trying to help are ungrateful. They feel like they're not appreciated. And police are systematically funneled into problems. So when they go into communities, they don't see barbecues or kids getting straight A's, even if that stuff is happening, and it is happening, they don't see it. They only see shootings, poverty, mental illness, broken families. They're dealing with all the broken pieces and they have very limited tools to do it. And it breeds cynicism. It breeds and ingrains this sense of, well, it's us and it's them and I can try and help. And eventually you get cynical. Eventually you really do see it as these people, which is like, it's very coded, but usually it's Black and brown communities. These people don't even want to help themselves. I'm just going to take my calls. I'm going to get through my day and I'm going to go back home. That's not all officers, but it's not an uncommon view of the world. You can only be a hero and a martyr for so long, and then you fall in line with the system. You fall in line with what policing expects of you, and you just do your paperwork. You just take your calls, you do your 20 years, you get your pension, and you get out.
So Michael, the number of calls and the paperwork for the calls, did you see the stress in individuals as you rode along with them towards the end of their shifts?
Did I see stress? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean?
I know when I was a firefighter, and I know the longer you work, the more tired you get. The more tired you get, the more complacent you get, and so sometimes on a call, the last hour, your attitude is a little bit different than it was the first call of the day. And so, did you see officers getting shorter in terms of verbal or in terms of putting up with whoever they were dealing with face to face?
I can't say that anything like that clearly stood out to me in the course of the ride-alongs. I can definitely say that officers have a variety of strategies for dealing with limited time. So it's they call it catching a call. So the idea is like, the last thing you want is to get flagged down 30 minutes before you go in. It's like the worst thing that could happen, because that's when you get flagged down and somebody reports something really awful, like a sexual assault or a kidnapping, and now you got hours of paperwork to go and you're stuck. And so officers would actually, they would hide. They might hide in a parking garage or like behind a school, just so they could begin typing up their paperwork. So they would actually leave a lot of paper for the end of the shift, because they got to get to calls, right? There's calls holding. You got to get there and take the initial report. You got to clear the board, they would call. So clearing the calls that we're holding, and then just let the paperwork pile up at the end of the shift. Maybe hide for a while to do that work. And other times the paperwork just sits and they take care of it at the beginning of the next shift, when things are usually a little bit slower. Particularly if it's the morning shift, it's slower at the beginning. If it's the late shift, you got plenty of time later on, so you'll do it then. But nothing clear as officer at 8 a.m. is markedly different than officer at 2 p.m. I don't think I saw anything quite that clear.
Thank you.
I have to ask Michael, do we know if there's any type of mental counseling or anything that goes on for officers annually? I can understand the stress of the job and just like Stan said, the complacency that can take place in that. Is there anything annually that officers may go through that will help them stride through this career? Because it's not a job that I go to for 6 months and I'm quitting and going to another job. Most officers are in it for the career.
So there's a lot of variation, as with most things in policing, as to how much mental health care there is available. So in the departments that I was in, without exception, there was some kind of peer support program. And that's an informal kind of network of officers. The officers opt into it. Usually it's senior officers will opt in to be a peer mentor of some kind. And so there's just a list of phone numbers. And if I'm a new officer and let's say that I see something, and officers do see and experience just really awful things. I'm sure Stan can speak as a firefighter, that you see bad stuff happen that a lot of other people don't see. I might be able to call somebody on that list. So that's very common, sort of informal network. The formal mental health care is becoming more common, but it tends to be reserved after what they would refer to as critical incidents. So things like a shooting, or there are sometimes categories, if you see like child sexual abuse, that might be flagged and you will be required to go and see a department provided mental health care professional for X number of sessions, things of that nature. As far as on call, you can go see mental health whenever you want to. I don't know how pervasive that is. What I do think is worth mentioning is that, for example, that memorial wall that I mentioned during the talk, where all the officers who were killed in the line of duty are listed, there is one kind of death that's very conspicuously absent, and it's suicides. If you kill yourself as an officer, your name will never go on that memorial wall. And that's the same across departments. It's the same at the National Memorial, and it's the same on these online memorials. So there is still a deep stigma around suicide and about talking about suicide. In fact, this project originally began when one of the original questions I had was based off of learning that far more officers kill themselves every year than are shot in the line of duty, that are fatally shot. And so I wanted to ask officers about suicide. And I very quickly realized nobody wanted to talk to me about it. Nobody. So that stigma remains. It's ingrained in policing. And I think it's moving in a direction that's changing. But as far as I think low-hanging fruit that we could do to support police, knowing that hurt people would be to provide more mental health services. I think requiring mental health services would be important, not just to help police, but to flag potential issues ahead of time. If you could identify substance abuse, if you could identify mental health concerns early, you might prevent too much police aggression. You might prevent police brutality. You might prevent these kinds of behaviors by proactively getting in front of them. It's a great question. I don't And I don't know what the landscape of mental health looks like for police, and I suspect there's a lot of variation.
We're going to have a supporter of the program of the series that's going to come in and ask you a question as well. You're doing a great job, Michael, and thank you for being transparent with these answers as well. One of our viewers, one of our attendees, stated something. I just wanted to add it in there. Jocelyn Avila. It is sad how law enforcement is always described in the news by the bad that some cops do, but do not show the good they perform. And I was thinking of that while you were speaking about, doing the ride-alongs. Growing up, we would always have community events where police officers would just be around, for community barbecues, basketball games. Now a lot of what's popular in a lot of cities are like art walks, things like that, just different community events where police officers will be visual there. And I would think that would help with the community relations as well, with officers being at more peace when answering calls in these communities as well, just to see the community out and in its true color. So I was thinking about that during the mental health as well. Just more officers being involved and participating in the community that they serve in.
Yeah, it's a good point. And so there's another research project that I was involved with, and let me see if I can bring it up. Oh, it's here. So this was a paper that my colleagues Kyle Payton at the Yale Law School and David Rand at MIT wrote a couple of years back. And so we were actually, going back to one of Stan's comments, looking at community policing. And so kind of at the heart of community policing is this very simple assumption, which is that a positive interaction between a police officer and a member of the public can improve perceptions of police. That is the underlying assumption. That one-to-one interaction can have an effect. But nobody's actually been able to test that. It's actually very difficult to isolate the effect of a single interaction. And so we set out to do that by randomizing these non-enforcement door knocks in New Haven, Connecticut with the New Haven Police Department. And so the door knocks look like this. As an officer just knocks on the door, introduces themselves. My name is Officer Sierra. I'm an officer in your district. I'm here as part of a community policing initiative. And I just wanted to introduce myself and get your perspective on problems in the community. Short conversation, usually less than 5 minutes. And then they hand over a business card with their name written on it. It says, "This is my card. This is my department issued cell phone number. Please give me a call if I can help you." That's it. That was the entire interaction. And so we had a survey before that visit and a survey after that visit in the control condition. In the treatment condition. And then a control condition also got a survey before and after, but they never got a visit. All right. So now we're able to isolate the effect of that one interaction. And what we find is that just that interaction can move the needle on people's perceptions of police. They view the police as more legitimate. They believe that police performance is better. They say that they are more willing to cooperate with the police. And they say they're more willing to comply with police commands 3 days after they receive the treatment. And this effect is durable up to 3 weeks after the interaction. So we still see an effect 3 weeks after for all of these measures, except for compliance. Compliance was the least affected of the 4. Now, all of that said, we measured perception. All right. So this is what people feel about the police. So I think what's really important here, and I think to Jocelyn's point, police can do all the barbecues they want, go to all the parades they want, kiss as many babies as they want. When rubber meets road, if you're still pulling people over and violating their rights and making them feel like their community is occupied, disrespecting people, I don't think a barbecue is going to fix that. I think there is something to be said critically about the media that if it bleeds, it leads. It wants to focus on antagonism, on conflict. And that I think is true. And it's a fair critique of the media. But I also don't think the answer here is to do more public relations work for the police, which they do, by the way. What do you see about police on the news? Oh, they got these drugs off the street and they got guns off the street and they arrested this person, they arrested that person. The police do get positive attention. But I don't think that's the answer here. And even if we were to improve perceptions, that doesn't fundamentally address the issue of inequality. It doesn't fundamentally address the issue of disparities in stops and arrests and uses of force. And so I don't think the media helps, to be very clear. But I don't think that having more feel-good stories is actually going to solve the problem.
The occupation line that you used. I'm glad, I like that line. But I think part of that occupation line is these officers, and usually they're Anglo officers and sometimes Hispanic and sometimes even Black, but the numbers of minority officers compared to the Anglo officers is high. And so when you ride into a Black neighborhood and you're a white officer, and then you get in your car and you go home to suburbia, that's a feeling of occupation. In other words, this guy doesn't live here, doesn't belong here, doesn't even know Mrs. So-and-so, who's the nicest old lady in the neighborhood, and yet he's the one that comes to my house when there's trouble, and so I can't feel his buy-in, and that's one of the biggest problems. That, you know, I understand that I don't want someone following me home and terrorizing my family, but I know that when I was on the job, the majority of, well, I should say pretty much all but 2 of the Black firefighters lived in the city. There's not many of us, it's 10 of us, but 8 of us lived in the city. The white officers, the firefighters, they all lived in suburbia. And so it's interesting that mental thing of, I don't want someone to run into somebody off the job that I put in jail on the job. And one of the things I found when I was off the job and I ran into somebody that I had gone to their house, but you know, we're doing more help than we're doing harm, firefighters. But I also know that when I ran into them off the job, it was a time for me to educate them. You know, you wouldn't have had that fire if you had did this. You wouldn't have had that, the fire wouldn't have been so big if you had done this, or, you know, some kind of education. And I think part of the loss of peace officers is that they don't have any buy-in to the towns that they work in. And so that lack of buy-in also puts them as occupants. They're occupying our city, you know, like you just said.
Yeah, I think that there is something intuitive about this idea of wanting police officers to have a vested interest in the outcomes of the places they police. And I think that makes intuitive sense. There's a historical irony, which is that part of the reason why we have moved slowly away from the policeman polices the same block where they live is because early in the history of policing, that actually was a very effective conduit for corruption. So that is a part of the historical story. Another part of it is actually a big macro level story about white flight. And so part of the reason why you can be a police officer who lives in the same community you police, if you're a Black officer, is because, well, there's no white people there. They left a long time ago and went to the suburbs. That's where they live. That's where they've lived for generations at this point. And so it would take a very special white officer in many regards to leave home and go move into this place where they haven't had family networks of any kind for generations. I'm not saying it can't happen. I will say that it's kind of a tall order and doesn't seem like the most effective way to change a system. And I think more fundamentally I think what you point to is attention. People in communities of color don't want no policing. They want better policing. They want different policing. And it's a conundrum, because in order for you to meet officers and to build those relationships and to build that linked vested interest in a place, it actually requires that the police be there. It requires that they be around. It requires that they actually be in a place and be more likely to detect crimes happening. Now, do officers have to do things like jam somebody up for jaywalking or just smoking weed on their porch or playing their music too loud? No. And that's the kind of thing that really pisses people off, is police seemingly having nothing better to do than messing with a barbecue. Yes, the city ordinance says that the barbecue can't be on the sidewalk or has to be 6. Yes, sure. But why? Why are you doing that here? And I think that there is that tension where people want the police there and they want relationships, but that actually forces people to come into conflict with the police. And so that's where I think this discussion about defunding and about really asking the question, why do we send police to do all these things? Why are they there? That's, I think, part of what's driving that, is that we've tried community policing for about 50 or 60 years now. We've dumped billions of dollars into cops grants to hire officers to do this stuff. We have built community substations in cities across the country to try and bring community into the police department and police into the community. And the report from the 21st Century Task Force, it reads a lot like the reports from the 1960s and 70s. You could actually put passages, and I've done it for my students, side by side and ask which one of these was written in 1965. And they can't tell the difference because the problems are the same. And so this is all to say, I am increasingly skeptical that the path forward is to build relationships between police and community, because the system of policing is very deeply ingrained. The problems are actually outside of policing to some effect as much as inside. And so it's about, how do we change a structure? How do we build a system or rebuild or reimagine, as I think some people are calling it, they are here in Austin, in a way that doesn't systematically bring police into contact with people in a way that continues to drive punishment, arrests, force.
Dan, I don't know if you had a chance to yet, but Dean Caballero would like to ask a question if he's unmuted. Dean, you're welcome to ask any questions.
Let me add him to the group.
Okay. Another thing that struck me during your presentation was we talked about guard being let down, and I noticed officers let their guard down during stops of white suspects. In the instance where officers were shot and executed, in the instance of a black suspect, there's no guard let down. A black or brown suspect, he's just rolling on the side of some kids, some brown kids on the sidewalk, and his hand is on his pistol. Guard is not let down in those situations, and it's just a in-your-face difference in the approach of answering calls and dealing with suspects. That really struck me during your presentation.
Yeah, and I think this is the part where I have to kind of put on my responsible researcher hat and say that, you know, I don't have a random sample of officers. That's what we would, in an ideal quantitative world, want, right? To say that, oh, this is a difference that's based on the officer, of their race and the race of the kids. I'll put it this way. I never saw it happen to a white person. I was in 3 departments. It's not like somebody had their hand on their gun all the time. That's not what was happening. But the one time I did see it, it was with a group of Latino kids. You know, that's not ironclad causality to convince my researcher friends in the room, but it's telling. It's telling that that's when it happens. I never saw, two white kids handcuffed because of weed on the floorboards of the car. I saw 2 black kids. In West River, it was 4 or 5 cops there. If it was for 3 black guys in a car, that's when I saw it. I did see white people get stopped. Not that I didn't see them get stopped, but I didn't see the same kinds of behaviors. They weren't yelling and cursing and beating on the black kids, but they also weren't sitting down the white kids and handcuffing them and taking their jacket away in the cold, which I also saw. I think that what my work is pointing towards is that you actually don't need to have racist, bigoted monsters in a police department to see inequalities happen. I think there's a branch of people that say, well, if we just have a good enough filtration system, if we just successfully interview and survey applicants and make sure none of the racists get in, we'll be able to fix this problem. But what I think my work is pointing towards is that let's assume we have perfectly unbiased officers, basically robots that will only go and only enforce the law. What you would still have is a system that systematically funnels police into black and brown neighborhoods with police officers who are systematically trained to expect violence and death at every turn. And so even if you assume that each individual officer has no predisposed biases about black criminality, violence, you are still going to get more uses of force in those communities. If you assume that mistakes of fact, so mistakenly seeing a furtive movement or a bulge, if you assume that's randomly distributed across officers, if you are disproportionately going to certain places, you're still going to get more of those cases there. And so this is all with the caveat that we know that we have racist police officers in departments. We know this. So why would we expect any different outcome than what we're seeing? And this is kind of why I talk about coats. Like, this is a system that's working as intended. If anything, it amplifies the biases that we know affect all of American society. We can find biases along racial lines. We can find racism in hospitals, in banks, in schools. Why would policing be any different?
Is that in your report?
Is what in my report?
What you just spoke of? When you did your final report, did you put that down that you saw biases? Was that part of your research?
So I saw biases.
Did you report to the departments after you spent time with them?
Oh, no. So I was not beholden to the departments in any regard. And in fact, when I speak with part of like my IRB is that officers in my writing, they are de-identified, and the departments, as you saw, Elmont and Sunshine and West River are not real departments. Those are fake city names. So my interactions, my interviews with the officers, for example, are privileged. That was part of the informed consent, is like, I'm not going to tell, your lieutenant what you told me in this call, or what you told me in the car. I'm not going to go and tell the chief about this. I'm happy to report that I didn't see awful brutality in front of me. That would have been a point for me to decide, basically, do I break confidentiality with this officer to report them? I didn't see it. I'm thankful that I wasn't faced with that choice. I think I look back and I would have been 24, 25, making that choice, whether to keep access to my field site or not. And looking back, I think that I would have needed to, but I probably would have consulted with advisors about what to do in that particular scenario. The question of whether or not I've written about bias and race and whether or not that affects the system, and that I am still working on my book. I hope that will be chapter 4. So I'm still working on that particular write-up.
Dean, welcome, and thank you for your support during the series. Did you have any questions for our presenter today?
May I ask my question?
Yes, Dean.
This is Caballero. Well, first of all, let me congratulate you, Dr. Sierra-Arévalo, for an excellent presentation. I found it very informative. My question is this: given your observations and your time spent in the field, and maybe interacting with policemen, do you think that maybe part of the issue, which may point to a possible solution, is that policemen are being trained as soldiers that belong to an army of occupation rather than officers to serve and protect?
I think that that's certainly what my work points to. I think at least it's part of the problem. And so, the one example that I've been writing about recently in the book, in my Southwestern field site in Sunshine, there's obviously official training documentation, right? So you have to hit these training points, and part of those official documents include what they call basically subject matter experts or sources that they would draw on to help build the curriculum. In this particular department, one of the sources that gets used is a book by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. Lieutenant Dave Grossman is the self-proclaimed founder of the field of killology. And he goes around the country, all around the world, in fact, and he trains police and the military and increasingly civilians about sheepdogs, sheep, and wolves. And there's words in there in the literal training documents of the department that say things like "be the predator." That's not an inherently militaristic phrase, but it feeds into this broader sense that there's an us and there's a them, that we are our own force, and then there are enemies that we must survive and, if necessary, conquer through the use of violence, through the use of force. That's a low-hanging policy recommendation, is don't have people like Dave Grossman in your official training curricula, for example. That is one thing that you could do. But even when you remove those things, I think the depressing takeaway from some of my work is that you could fix the training completely, whatever that means. All force would only be used equitably. etc. The police are fundamentally still an institution that is defined by its ability to use violence. That's what makes the police the police. That's why the police are the police and the social worker is a social worker. They actually do a lot of the same work, to be very clear. They go and manage disputes. They try and connect people with resources to the best that they can. They have limited resources, limited time, limited personnel. But a social worker does not have the legal authority to divest you of life and liberty under certain circumstances. The police are, as written by Egon Bittner 50 years ago, they are the or else of society. Do these things, please. The or else is always implicit. It's always unspoken, and sometimes it's explicit. Do this, or I'm going to make you do it. I don't think that changes if you fix the training. That is something that has been and will likely always be true of the police as an institution.
After the attack on the Capitol, police officers were singled out as being part of it from other departments, and actually, I think there was one suicide after the fact, and one of the questions is, do you think there will be more suicides now that many people think poorly about police officers? Do you think that might happen, or and we're not keeping the stats on that, are we?
That's a good set of questions. I think it's actually 2 suicides have now been recorded in the DC police. So there is, I mean, that's for a department that size, that's a lot. Any department, really, 2 suicides is a lot. The question of that many people now think poorly about cops. The police actually have a very consistent public rating in terms of approval of the police. It dipped in 2014 to all-time lows, and it's back up again, and it's pretty much where it's been for the past 50 years. It's incredibly consistent. And so I think that this notion that, like, the police are hated now more than ever is not supported by the data. It's not supported by our actual public opinion polls. I do think that the police are being called out in public media more often than they were, say, I don't know, in 2005. I think that much is pretty clear. You see shows like John Oliver, popular things like Trevor Noah. They have special episodes on police brutality and qualified immunity. That much is true. And so whether or not that contributes to suicide is an open question. Whether or not it will lead to an increase, I believe, is also a very open question. There is some work by the folks at Blue Help, H.E.L.P. They do their own crowdsourcing of officer suicides across the United States. Their data has some idiosyncrasies, so it also includes things like corrections officers that you would not traditionally include alongside measures of, say, local police, sheriffs, and state. As far as I know, we don't have good data to the effect of being able to say that there's a trend. What we do know consistently is that far more police officers take their own lives than are killed by suspects in the line of duty, and that has been consistent. I think the question of officer suicide moving forward is an important one, and we do need to know, what is going to happen to officers themselves. What about their mental health and their own wellness and safety? It has to be a part of our consideration, considering that the police and the public is what we talk about. The police are the public, if you believe the Peelian principles from so many centuries ago.
Thank you, Michael. We are going to conclude, but next time you come and see us, I want to ask you a question about qualified immunity, because that's something we really need to touch on some more.
Oh yeah, talk about that for a couple of days.
Thank you so much for being here. It was a great show, great information.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Thank you for coming back and giving us even more of a powerful show. That was a really informal presentation, and I can't wait to see the final project, see how it all comes out.
Next 2 of us, man. The book gets done soon.
Thanks, Michael. And good luck in getting tenure too. That's always a difficult time, but it sounds like you're on your way. I don't think you'll have a problem.
Right.
We're trying.
Well, everyone, this will conclude tonight's episode of Conversations on Race and Policing. We hope to see you all next week. Mary, Stan, thank you so much. Ravi, Dean Cavallero, everyone, Jeremy, everyone for being here and making this a special episode as well. I hope we got everyone's questions out there answered. And feel free to join us next week, same time, 3 p.m. Conversations on Race and Policing. And we are signing off, guys.